Hi, everyone. Welcome to Pride Table Talks. My name is Deborah Porta. I'm the Executive Director of Pride Northwest. We're glad you could join us. Pride Table Talks is a collaborative effort between Pride Northwest, GLAPN, formerly known as the Gay and Lesbian Archives of the Pacific Northwest, and SAGE, which is housed inside Friendly House and serves our LGBTQ plus seniors. We launched in February and have moved to a every other month format so that we can lend better time to preparing and engaging with our guests. Today we have I'm not sure how to describe Renee. Renee LaChance is a journalist, publisher, entrepreneur, contractor. Robin is better with words, so I'm just going to read Robin's words. Remember when community leaders argued for a year over, Robin remembers TKO.
I bet he was there.
Oh, well, there you go. For a year over whether lesbians should be included in gay pride or gay was just fine. It was enough to make Renee quit her job and start her own community newspaper. A champion of inclusiveness, Renee has owned a coffee bar, a concert production company, an advertising agency, a motel, a construction project management company, a newspaper, a book publishing company, and she is currently co-publisher at Tales from the Pandemic. Welcome, Renee. I'm really
30 seconds. Yeah, my cousin was right. Sorry. I just can't believe how much I've done.
You've just been busy.
Yeah, just been a little bit.
Been busy, a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, and you and I spoke the other day and pretty much agreed on the fact that there is no way in heck we're going to get through everything you've done and all that you'd be able to share in 90 minutes.
Well, no.
But we're going to try our best to hit some of the highlights and talk some history that I know I was not aware of. I moved here in 1997, so there's a whole lot of our history that happened before I got here.
Oh wow! Yeah.
So I'm really looking forward to this. So let's kind of start at the beginning a little bit. Maybe give us a snapshot of early Renee. You mentioned to me you are a lifelong Oregonian, mostly in Portland, yeah?
Correct.
And maybe whatever part you're comfortable sharing about what was coming out like for you and a little bit of early days. Whatever.
All right. Well, as a little kid, I was the little tomboy who played more with boys than girls and was most comfortable in a t-shirt and jeans. And I think that's the story of most butches. I like to play in forts and ride my bike and chase balls. And, I was either a kid or a dog. I wasn't always sure. But then, so it didn't really seem to matter growing up, whether I was a boy or a girl. I just got to be who I was and fought my mom about hairstyles and clothes. And, but I was just always who I was. And I didn't have words for that. I just knew I was different than the other girls. The girls thought I was weird because I always wanted to play the husband if they came over and played house. And I didn't like playing with the dolls until I found a boy doll that I could play with. And I liked that. Just with the girls, I would have to, like what my parents and grandparents would give me Barbie stuff. And I'd have to, and my mom would say, those dolls haven't been touched. You're not being very nice to your grandparents. And so I'd invite kids over to play with them and make them look like they had been played with. So, but yeah, I wasn't that kid that played with dolls. And then when puberty hit, I got boobs and started my period and bled every month. And it was obvious that biologically I was that definition of a girl. And I didn't like boys anymore and girls got more interesting. And I went to an all-girl high school and I just evaded heterosexuality with every fiber of my being. It was like, and but still there were no words for it. until well, as a freshman in high school, I joined the drama club, and they talked about thespians. And then they talked about how the teacher was a lesbian. And I started getting them a little confused about whether maybe I was a thespian, but maybe I was a lesbian, because, you know, I didn't know what those words meant. But it was pretty gossipy that being a lesbian wasn't okay, but being a thespian was. But anyway, later in life, I figured it all out and decided, yeah, I'm a lesbian, and just told people who needed to know, and just continued to try to be who I am. But after a few years of struggle, my mom did say to me, because she just couldn't handle it, I guess. And she said, you just pretend that I'm dead, and I'll pretend that you're dead. And I haven't seen her since.
Okay. But first, I appreciate that. We've been kind of off and on joking a little bit, where there's not really a whole lot of questions that I need to ask, because you have such a full story. But let's start with journalism. I was actually pretty surprised to find out how young you were when you really started working for the papers. There were a couple before Just Out, and then how young you were when Just Out was founded.
Right. Yeah.
So
that's how I can be 50 now.
Older than you are. Wow. Okay.
No, I started journalism in high school. I was on my high school paper, and I was the advertising director. And I used to direct photography, all the photography shoots. I was always producing and directing and selling ads. So after that one, I guess it was when I was 22, I was going to the bars and picking up the gay paper, which was the Northwest Fountain at the time. And I'm like, God, I don't see myself represented here. Where's the stuff about women? Where's the stuff about lesbians? And so I contacted the publisher and said, hey, what's up with this? How come there's no news about women? He said, well, why don't you write a women's page? And I'm like, oh, classic answer. So I did. I started writing a women's page, and then I sold ads on it to support it. And then he turned out to be just a pedophile. And so I left that paper for another paper that started up called the Cascade Voice, and started out selling ads. And then within 3 months, I was the editor, and Jay Brown was my assistant editor. And we worked there for 18 months, Jay and I together. And it was during that time that that the TKO meetings happened, and that the Aunt Jemima incident at Waterfront Park happened. And those were huge consciousness raising events for Jay and I. And when we tried to bring that consciousness into the Cascade Voice and get it into our community, we were met with brick walls and obstinance, and it was just fight after fight after fight. And after months of that, trying to do it right from within, I said, God, Jay, we helped him start this paper. We could start our own. And so Jay said, well, I'll follow you anywhere. And off we went.
What was you and I talked before about TKO, but what was the Aunt Jemima incident? What was that?
The Aunt Jemima incident was at the 1983 newly named Lesbian and Gay Pride at the Waterfront Park rally. A man came in Aunt Jemima drag, and I believe blackface, and an African-American woman got in his face, rightfully, and was so angry and upset. And we had security volunteers who did security, and they had gone to a couple, sessions to learn how to be security, but we didn't prepare them for that, right? And so they were trying to protect the man, because, angry Black woman, they thought they fell totally into that stereotype. And I'm stepping in, having recently gone through TKO and, been learning things I didn't know before. And I thought, no, this isn't right. He needs to be out of here. He can't be here. And if she's that upset, we have to listen to her and believe everything she says and support her. And I got some other people to support me, supporting her. And it was just it wasn't a pretty scene. And it's actually quite awful. But no one got physically hurt. And after that, it just prompted lots of community meetings and discussion and more kind of that, how are we going to deal with this? And the paper, that's really kind of what started it. The Cascade Boys supported the Aunt Jemima dude.
Gotcha.
And Jay and I supported the woman. And we were, it was a very, very hard time, but I think the community grew. I hope the community grew, but it's really put some things in place, and it certainly helped me to evolve.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And then there's stuff that happened after that I could talk about, but that might come up later.
Sure. Well, so let's talk about Just Out, because there's just so much to talk about there. So you and Jay, put the paper together, right? So I want to talk about a couple of things. If I understood when you and I spoke before, the timing of that was pretty close to when the AIDS epidemic really got off and running, basically.
Right.
How did that crisis come on your radar, and what was it actually like covering that as a story, as a you have a printing voice there?
Right. Well, the first time I heard of anything, the first inkling about AIDS was that there was a gay cancer, a very rare gay cancer that a cluster of gay men were getting, in the public health departments on the West Coast were extremely concerned. And then it was back in the days where there were fax machines and there were no computers. Let's all remember, we talked on landlines. If somebody had to complain in an editorial, they had to write me a letter and find a stamp. So we got a fax from the San Francisco Public Health Authority saying there's this new gay cancer, the bathhouses needed to be closed, the bars needed to be closed to protect the community, and action needed to be taken immediately. And we're like, what is this? This sounds like the man trying to beat down the gay person, and what the heck is going on? And it just seemed so unreal. And it outlined how it was going to spread within the community and men would die. And they just outlined this whole thing that was just so horrifying. No one could believe it. I passed it around the room, the office. There's probably 10 people that we all sat there and talked about it. And everybody's like, how can this be? How can this be? And we just kind of set it aside and ignored it, because how could it be? It's like somebody telling you about COVID the first time. How can that be? What's going to happen? For 3 years, we're going to deal with this virus. How did we not believe? We didn't believe about COVID. We had that same reaction. And there was no way you would get the community to do that. I mean, even when it became apparent that is exactly what needed to happen, that didn't happen. When it became apparent that, yeah, we need to close down the bathhouses, it's transferred by sex. And if we need to close down the bars because y'all are having sex in the bathrooms and we didn't think about safe sex hadn't been established yet. All that stuff happened really fast, but not before a lot of men were infected. Before a lot of men in our community were affected. So writing about it, the government wouldn't the president wouldn't acknowledge it was a thing. Gee, sounds just like COVID. Reagan would not acknowledge that HIV/AIDS was an issue until Rock Hudson got it, and his wife loved Rock Hudson, so she said, "Please do something for Rock."
Oh.
And Ryan White, a young teenage boy who had hemophilia.
Yeah, I remember that.
Ryan White. Oh, I said his name. So writing about it was like, we didn't have it. The mainstream media and the government didn't acknowledge it. So here we're writing about something just within our community, but people aren't reading about it anywhere else. So who do you believe and who do you trust? And then when people started getting sick, it just became like, oh my God, this is true. And there was no denying it because the numbers were so large, and the crisis was just so big. So what we ended up writing about was a lot of activism that started up. There was this group called ACT UP that I'm not sure exactly where they started. I always felt like they started in Portland. And so we covered and promoted and participated in all those protests. And there was a group called Queer Nation that did the same things, did creative protests. And we would just, whatever news we could get. I mean, Fauci was involved back then. I mean, this is a very bizarre circle.
Mhm.
The AIDS pandemic and the COVID pandemic.
Interesting.
But we just did things to get the word out. Our mission at Just Out was to get the word out and to encourage everyone to come out. That was our mission. And we felt we needed to do it until our news was reported. And at the time for us, it was the Oregonian, was the big thing. Right. If it had been done nationally or something. But it's when our news is reported in the mainstream press. And then we would say that, and then we would laugh because that seems so impossible. Mm-hmm. Now it's all you see, there aren't gay presses anymore.
So how long did it take? How long did it take for mainstream media in this region to start talking about it?
20 years. I don't know. Are they talking about it? Are they even talking about it now? The Moderna vaccine is going to they're going to use that technology to create an HIV vaccine. However, how many places have you seen that talked about? That's huge. They have an HIV vaccine 40 years later.
Right.
Wow.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the specific organizing actions that, because you kind of mentioned it, we see some things today, but things just seem very different today. So what were, boycotts, you mentioned boycotts were an effective tool and one of the largest tools available to the community years back. What did that look like? And maybe some examples of kind of what you did.
Let's see. I think one of the first boycotts that was against a well-known institution in Portland specifically was there was a boycott of Alpenrose Dairy. And we worked really hard at Just Out to get, we created an ad department that no other gay paper had. Because we were dependent on non-gay businesses. The traditional gay bars did not advertise with us because we made those bad connections with the Cascade Boys early on. And so we just acted like any other newspaper would, selling ads. We just went to everybody. And we did, there's a practice called co-op advertising where, like, this was Food Front Co-op, bought an ad and they used logos from products they carried, and those vendors helped pay for the ad. It's called co-op advertising. So we had set some of that up with Food Front, and one of the logos they put in was for Alpenrose Dairy. Well, Alpenrose didn't realize it was going in a gay paper, and when they figured that out, they contacted Food Front and said, "Hey, you can't do that. Stop. You can't run that ad, and please don't ever do that again." And Food Front went, "Oh, well, come get your products," and kicked them out of their store. And then they called their friends at Food Front and said, at People's Food Co-op, and said, "Hey, this is what happened," and this is what they did. And then people said, "Oh, come and get your products." And so it started with two big, small retail outlets. And then we wrote about that. And then people started writing letters to Alpenrose and telling them they weren't going to use their products. And you remember, it's not social media, so they actually had to write letters or make phone calls. Right. And I was so proud. I was so happy that something we did got that kind of attention, or that people came in our defense. We didn't ask them to do it. They just came in our defense and did it. So then Portland PFLAG was run by Bill and Ann Shepard, who were Susie Shepard's parents. And Ann Shepard went to the CEO of Alpenrose Dairy, got a meeting because she's a good customer, right? And she told them, hey, man, I'm sure she said it nicer than that. She, hey, Mr. whatever your name is, I've got three gay kids, and they grew up drinking Alpenrose milk and eating your dairy products. I think your milk made them gay. And the guy just freaked out. And she said, I think I need to go to the Oregonian and the Oregon Journal and tell them this. And he's like, oh, it just freaked him out. I thought, oh my God, that is so outrageous. That is so outrageous. And he he kind of came around. He still didn't put the ad in the paper, but he just kind of slowed his venom a little. And it was and this was in the late 80s, mid to late 80s. And so we were fighting the not Cascade Boys, we're fighting the Oregon Citizens Alliance. The AIDS pandemic was becoming rampant, and we were just trying to survive on two fronts with our health and our lives. Well, actually, that is both of them lives. And to have Anne go into that, and Alpenrose was having that reaction because of the Oregon Citizens Alliance, because it was probably somebody there who saw it and said, hey, what are you doing and advertising in that fag paper or something?
Right.
So, oh my God, that was amazing. I wanted her to be my mom.
Right? Don't we all?
But now I just have to tell you, so when I was a kid, I grew up with Alpenrose products. And I had a box on my doorstep, and everyone in my neighborhood had a box on their doorstep and got Alpenrose products. And then sometime along the way, they stopped doing delivery, and then people just bought it in the stores. But then after, like 2 years ago or less than that, I am on Facebook, and an ad pops up saying, hey, Alpenrose Dairy is going to start doing delivery again. And I got so excited. And I'm looking at the ad, and it's a picture of a front door with a doorstep with a gay flag hanging next to the door, and the box is on the doorstep. I went, holy crap, we came full circle, right? And I'm sure they put that ad on my page because I'm gay, but still. Yeah. So I thought, oh my God. So I get the Alpenrose products. I look at that little box and eat my favorite cottage cheese and have a warm place in my heart.
Right on. Tell us about you, Becca. We're still in this boycott business, and this, we've talked a little bit before, and I had this kind of conversation with other folks as well. But back in the day, I don't know if it's that much different now, but definitely back in the day, it's very deep division between the men's community and the women's community, and never shall the two meet, kind of like different lives, which makes the do you want to share the story about Cadillac Cafe?
Sure. So it was at a time when, let's see, it would have been the early 90s. And so there weren't any legal rights protecting gay people yet in the city of Portland or anywhere in Oregon. And I went to Cadillac Cafe often because it was gay owned by two gay men. And I was there for breakfast, and I was dating a woman named Ariel, Water Woman, and she and I had spent the night together and then gone and had breakfast, and it was a little smoochy as we went in separate cars to go to our jobs. And we were probably over smooching by some people's definition. I don't know. But the owner came out and asked us to stop. And I'm like, dude, you know who I am? And what? This is so weird. I said, you're gay. And he said, I don't care. My customers are offended. And I look at the window, which we're standing in front of, and I couldn't really see anybody in there. And I'm like, wow, I was just appalled. I was so in shock that I had no reaction besides being appalled. And so Ariel went off and I went off, and I went and told people about it, and I called my lawyer and said, "God, I want to do something about this." And there's probably Brad Woodworth was probably the attorney, and he said, "Yeah, well, there's no laws that says you can't do that." I'm like, another injustice. So a couple 2 years later, after Portland had enacted some anti-discrimination legislation, it happened to 2 other women. Same exact thing. They were smooching on the sidewalk. He came out and asked them to stop, and then they had a recourse though, and they sued them and got a little money for that. And I believe, I was thinking that during the time that happened to me, that we had a kiss in at the Cadillac Cafe, but I think it happened after the other couple did it.
Okay.
But at one of those times, we did a kiss in where we went to the Cadillac Cafe and just took up the whole, lesbians just took up the whole restaurant, and were smoochy and affectionate and quite obnoxious and wonderful. And so we gave them money, but I think we made a point.
Sure. I think the reason that story sticks out, not because it's a Cadillac Cafe, but it's this trying to figure out how to put this in words, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about how easy it is for us to assume that because we're part of the same community in some way, that that we're either all on the same side of something, whatever the something happens to be, or all like-minded, and or have each other's backs. And and this is where I want to talk a little bit about TKO and what that was, because I don't know if folks in the audience will have known what it was, but I sure as heck had never heard of it. And the work to make progress as a community and what that takes, and finding the connections between us, because there's so much difference and so much I'm not even sure what the right word is, because I see similar things today, maybe not involving certain identities, but just generally speaking, this there's a lot of disconnect and disconnection between our current communities as well.
Yes.
That was a big, broad question, but
was there a question?
Yeah, well,
you want me to talk about TKO?
Yeah, let's talk about TKO, and I mean, why was it important to do it to begin with? And where did it come from, and what was it?
Well, I think it may have started in 1981, and I think all the writing about it is in the Cascade Voice. So I need to find those issues to have the facts, but I'll tell you what my facts are, and then those will be the law. When I went to the meetings, I was there as a journalist. Everything I ever did was as a journalist. So I was there to report on it. So I didn't participate. I was an observer. But let me tell you, that was something to observe. So they must have started in 81, and it was around adding the word lesbian to gay pride, because it was always gay pride and gay this and gay that, and lesbians wanted to be recognized as part of the community. And so these were, since the gay male bars gave all the money to the events that would have that name, they had a very big say in what the name could be. And so the bar owners and representatives and supporters of the gay male bars came, and there were radical feminists and just regular feminists and people of color who also weren't being represented and want to talk about that. And it was called technical knockout, so that people knew they could just say what they needed to say, and that it might hurt.
This is a community gathering, right?
Right. And yeah, we had it in the basement of the MCC, and the times I went, there were at least 25 people there, and there would be people face to face, just stuff you would not see now. I mean, I can't imagine seeing that now. But I believe it may have been Cliff Jones and Amani who facilitated it. but there were facilitators, and it was a very strongly facilitated, and there were rules of how to communicate. You know, you had to take your turn. You couldn't just all get going. So there were rules, and it was facilitated, and the agenda was to try to find common ground. And it took like a year and a half. And finally, somehow lesbians were allowed to get in. I mean, on the names of things.
Right.
But it was, for me, it was very eye-opening to see that thoughtfulness to the community and to a process. You know, and Cliff Jones has gone on to do nothing but fantastic facilitating for all kinds of businesses, and that's his jam. But he started out early, and he was really good. So I know people didn't attend all the meetings, and I'm sure that everybody who is a leader in the community now probably did attend at least one or two of them, maybe, because I don't know if they went on every week or once a month, but it seemed like a lot.
Sure.
And they just would not agree, could not agree. And they would just have the same argument over and over. These two, the radical feminists, who was Adrienne Weller, and the freedom socialist people, and then the bar owners. Yeah, it was bad. And then people of color wanting, hey, we're in this too. Let's all be together. And I think that's when the Black United Front started, and the Anti-Racism Brigade, and some other things that happened back then that were important.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So aside from the name of Pride being changed at the time, did anything else, any other changes, any other community shifts come out of the TKOs that you?
Well, I think it was healthy to have the dialogue, even if things didn't change right away. It certainly at least gave people, the next time they encountered a situation, they would have that information in their head. And hopefully over time, their actions would change, or that it would have some effect or something. Mm-hmm. But I think it made us more cohesive. I mean, all of this time, but before 1992, when we had to come together to fight ballot measure 9, all that time before that was building foundation to have that fight. I feel like we didn't know it.
Right.
That's what we were doing. And so to have had that in the early 80s and before the AIDS pandemic, you know, I think that adding lesbians to things came about in part because the lesbians stepped up to take care of their gay brothers. Mm-hmm. Early on, in the very beginning. And that's why we're in the front.
Well, before let's see, a couple of things I want to talk about specific to Just Out, because then I want to talk about the motel on the coast. Tell me again what was this taken hostage thing? I just have it in my notes, and I think
it goes back to the Aunt Jemima incident.
Okay.
So a year after the Aunt Jemima incident, at the next Pride, we had started publishing Just Out. So the Aunt Jemima stuff happened during the Cascade Voice and was written about in that publication. And when the Pride was happening in June of '84, a group was marching called the Anti-Racist Brigade. And so Jay wrote an editorial talking about how brave the woman was, used her name, and said he was really glad that one of the things that came out of it was this Anti-Racist Brigade, and that he hoped the brigade would start at the front and go through to the last person in the march, that we would all be standing for diversity because diversity was our power. And so that was the editorial, but he used her full name. And by journalistic standards, that was okay to do because her name had been used in another publication and it had been a public incident.
Gotcha.
Okay. Well, by printing her name some people, whether it was the Aunt Jemima fellow or somebody else, some white supremacists got her address. They terrorized her and harassed her to the point where the anti-racist brigade had to keep watch in front of her house to try to protect her, because, you know, police weren't our friends at the time. And but she felt so scared and threatened she had to leave. And so again, at this time, we're a monthly newspaper. We don't have the internet. We don't have computers. So we hear about this like a week after the incidents started happening. And we wanted to write about that. But the people involved said, no, 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 do not write about this. And so we wanted to publicize it. We wanted to put the word out. No, 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 please don't do that. You've done enough, you know, kind of like that. So in the next issue, which was a month later, Jay wrote that we apologized for using her name without using her name. We apologized for using her name and rationalized how we felt that was okay and that we hadn't done anything wrong, and that you know, something, and then, well, the woman who distributed our paper was part of the anti-racist brigade, and she picked the paper up the night it was printed and was going to start distributing the next day. This gave her time to read the paper and see that editorial and take it to her friends and say, hey. And her friend said, oh, you can't distribute that until that is changed, until they reprint the paper and change that editorial. And I'm like, and they come to me and they tell me this, and I'm like, what? We had money to print one round of a newspaper. We can't just reprint the newspaper. And they said, well, you can't have it. We're not gonna let you have it. We didn't know where it was. I mean, you know, it was like, oh my God. And these are people I respect, people who are like my aunties, people who are like my mentors. So I couldn't just discount what they were telling me and saying to me. But I was so infuriated, and Jay Brown was so infuriated. Oh my God. So I had him on one side, like, no, get the paper back, freedom of the press, blah, we didn't do anything wrong. And I'm like, yeah, but Jay, these people are talking to us. We have to listen to them, and we gotta at least think about what they're saying. And, you know, but that was the most horrible experience ever. It's like, you know, having your child, I shouldn't use a people reference, but just it was the most horrible thing ever at that time in my life. And I didn't know how to deal with it. I'm 24 years old, you know, it's like, and Jay acts 24 years old, but he was 48. And so I spent a day. Oh, so there were people on my staff even who were involved with it. Rupert Kennard was on the side of the kidnappers. I mean, he didn't advocate it to be kidnapped, but once it was, we're like, okay, well, this is where we're at. Let's work it out. And Ann Hines, who did graphics for us, was part of it. Kathleen Sadat and Sandra Parker were part of it. That was the first time I was on the bad side of either of those two women. You don't want that, but definitely you don't want to be on the bad side of Kathleen Sadat. And it wasn't the last time, but we gained a lot of respect for each other. And so over a day where I'm talking to these people about, first I had to accept that it wasn't, even though it wasn't wrong, it also wasn't right. And why it wasn't right is because the rules were written for white people. And from a person of color's perspective, it's a very different thing. And this thing had already happened. And though we felt much differently about publicizing things, it wasn't our right to do that. And so once we could accept that, we could come to an end, a result. So what ended up happening, and also around at the same exact time, this is why I was probably having a nervous breakdown, we had been getting printed through the same people who did the nickel ads. And they had decided because we were a gay paper, they weren't going to print us anymore. I'm like, you printed us for 6 months, you just figured out we were gay? I mean, what's going on? Again, the Oregon Citizens Alliance. Oh, this wasn't that yet. No, that wasn't that it. But anyway, yeah, so homophobia. And so we had just found a new printer. And so when I come to him and say, oh, our paper's been held hostage, he goes, oh my God, who have I gotten myself hooked up with? But anyway, he agreed to give us a deal and we could print just one page, pull out the bad page, put the new page in, and then distribute the paper. So the brigade raised the money and the brigade inserted the page. They spent like a day and a half pulling and putting. So we were maybe 4 or 5 days late getting out, which I felt super bad about. But Oh, it was awful and wonderful because uh, we could disagree. I mean, we could sit in a room and talk and say, this is what's real for me, and this is what's real for me. And yeah, well, you have that reality, and I have this reality, and this thing has to happen. And you just have to accept that. You just have to accept that. And so learning to trust that when somebody says that to me, I can trust. I just have to accept that. So I learned that about Kathleen Sadat and Rupert and a bunch of other people who I didn't ever have to have that process again. And I learned how to be an ally because the women that were part of that anti-race, it was mostly women, the people who were part of that anti-racism brigade just showed me how to be an ally. They said, look, well, this is how you do it. Then if this has to happen, then you raise the money to make it happen. Okay, you need bodies to do this work. We get the bodies to make that happen. They didn't depend on the African-American or the people of color that were part of the process. They came up with those solutions themselves and they enacted them themselves and got us to go along. And so I learned how to be an ally.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's that story is resonates for me because it's when you're in a position of doing something that's community wide, like the paper, like Pride, whatever, and there's a lot riding on it, right? And there's a lot riding on the physical doing of it and the getting it out there, being on time and having everything go right and all this. And when you're confronted with a really significant, okay, we need to address how we just did this thing or how we need to do that thing, it's kind of scary.
Mm-hmm.
Very scary to be doing something that's really community significant. And then I don't even know how to put it into words of that learning process and that changing process and doing it all at the same time while you're still physically carrying out the thing.
Exactly.
So that's what sticks with me is it's just that's where I think that's where my grade comes from because I wasn't gray when I started.
Dude, 35.
So yeah, so I appreciate that story because it's like real life, all of these things we think of them, we tend to think in movies and like it's a TV show, and like real life is like it's scary when this stuff is actually happening and because you don't know how it's going to end up.
Right.
You don't know what's going to happen. So I appreciate that. So one of the things mentioned in your bio is, and we talked about, is this motel on the coast. What was the name?
The Seaview Motel.
So
for some time it was called the Jacqueline Seaview, and then it just became the Seaview.
Gotcha. So how did you end up doing
that? Well, when it was Jacqueline Seaview, she advertised in the gay papers, like she advertised in the Northwest Fountain, which was the first paper I worked at. Because she had 2 gay daughters. And so I was at a bar for New Year's Eve, and it was a door prize was a free night at Jacqueline Seaview Motel. And it was a drawing at the door. So I won that and went there to use my one night. And it was pretty cool. And Jacqueline would come out with a loaf of sourdough bread that she had just baked, but she didn't have butter. So you'd have to go down the road to find a store to get butter. But
where was it located?
It was in south of Yachats, Oregon. So then when I was working on the Cascade Voice, she advertised there, and it was a trade. So I would get some free nights in exchange for getting no money for doing work. And so I would go stay there. And then when I had just out, I did a trade with her and did the same thing. I would go take breaks from the chaos there. And it came up for sale. She sold it to 2 gay men named Carl with a K and Carl with a C. And they owned it for a while, and I was going there while they had it. And then they sold it to some lesbians, and I never went there while they owned it. Oh, I think I went there once when they owned it. But when I heard that it was coming up for sale again, I thought, oh, this is my chance. And so I made it happen. And so I ran it for 7 years and lived on the edge of the world and learned the rhythms of nature and that nature was cruel.
Well,
Yeah, nature's cruel. So, but I also learned how to be around people who weren't gay because I had been so isolated in the gay community. I just hadn't branched out. In fact, my neighbor, motel owner, she's on here today, Christine DeMall, she had Ocean Haven down the road. She came by after I moved in, and she said we were going to be best friends. I'm like, yeah, no, I don't need any straight friends. She just, I don't know why we're best friends, but I don't know why she stuck around. But it was very hard for me to adjust to having non-gay people there. But I realized they were fun too. And they didn't care about me, so why should I care about them?
There's that.
And, caring about them. I know it's okay. I would want to go tuck people in. I got a little codependent. I'm gonna say, oh, they're in their room. I want to go tuck them in.
Why was the hotel important to you?
Well, it was community. It was a place for our community to have respite. And a lot of people from Portland went there to vacation and feel safe. I mean, it felt safe because you could be who you were. You could go there with your girlfriend. You could go there you could have your wedding there. You could have your ashes spread there. It was just a community place. And you go there with your dog. People had their dogs put down and then buried their dogs there. I mean, it was just, it was safe place to be who you are. And we got a lot of people from Eugene and Portland and Salem and all around.
Right.
But that's what was important.
Okay. Trying to figure out where we want to go next. We have a couple of questions that we'll get to in just a second. Actually, let's go to those questions because they're kind of extensions of where we've been. You saw these questions earlier. Let's start with Lily. Is there still a need for Just Out and or the equivalent in Portland?
I think so. I think that we're disconnected because we don't have one thing that's connecting us. Even though I told the story about Jay and I joking that Just Out wouldn't be necessary if the mainstream press talked about queer people and our news and told our news, and it would need to be queer people telling the news too. And we have Rachel Maddow and Anderson Cooper and others, but that's not enough. It's not telling. We need to tell our stories our way, and we have to tell the stories. So I do think it's still necessary, and I think it's one of the things that's keeping us apart as a community.
I would have to agree.
Yeah.
Vaughn asks if you could give some life advice. That's always a fun one. If you could give some life advice to your 25-year-old self, what would you say? Let's say pick an age. Sometimes 55 is that age, and sometimes it's not.
Yeah. I don't know. I always have practical advice, like buy Apple when Bill Gates does. Because right after that, they invented the iPod, and man, they shot up.
Right. I do periodically feel just like I'm like 3 years behind where I should have totally done that 10 years ago or however long it was. Yeah, that's a definite. What if you were, and sometimes this is the closing message, but we still have plenty of time. If you're looking, how do I word this? If you're looking out over our community, right, and thinking about what we're missing, or what we could, yeah, what do we miss other than other than a voice, other than a just out or a paper? What are we missing as a community in your mind right now?
I think unity. And I think I spent a lot of time fostering that unity through Just Out, for sure, but also through events. Like I remember producing an event called the 10% Review, and it was a group of 6 queers who came from the East Coast, and it was kind of a Broadway musical theater review that we did for 2 weeks at the Northwest Service Center. And it was like one of the first times that an equal representation of men and women came to the events. It was 3 men, the actors were 3 men and 3 women. So I cried every show because it was just such a unifying event. And the show was unifying because the men got to make fun of, in the show, they made fun of lesbians, and the lesbians made fun of the gay men. And so gay men and lesbians are laughing at each other in the audience. And it's like, oh my God, this is what we need. This is what we need. And having that connection and that unity in that space, I think is one of the things that we're missing. That was just the best show. That was really great. Laughing together, I think, is the most healing thing a community can do. And we can't get together. It's COVID.
Well, yeah, but COVID-ish will pass at some point, and so I think about because I think you're right. I think I think our community is fairly siloed, and we continue to be vulnerable as a community because we don't have that cohesiveness. And I don't mean the, fake everything's cool cohesiveness that people are that we think is what we're aiming for, but the real, the thinking about the TKO time and the commonality, like where's the connecting piece,
Right.
Because I worry about how vulnerable we remain, even in this region, even as much as we think about what we have here, especially compared to other parts of the country, but how vulnerable we are to losing that if we're not careful. That's the kind of stuff. It's that and how many porta potties we need at the festival are the 2 things that keep me up at night.
Right.
So I just, it's interesting to find out what other people think about where are we at? What are we missing? What kind of action needs to happen to keep moving us forward, I guess,
Well, I think some of those, like some of those TKO kind of conversations where people can say, well, you lesbians, you do this, this, and this, or you trans men, you're this, this, and this, where people can safely spout whatever it is that stereotype is they have about that person, and then actually be able to have that person say, yeah, no, I'm not like that. I don't know anybody like that. Here's who I am. And then they go, oh, damn, how did I miss that? But it has to be in a space where you can be safe, where everybody can feel safe having those things said. And that's where the facilitation, the ground rules, and those things come into play. Yeah, I think those, and that, we did it during ballot measure 9 with non-gay people to teach them about us. I remember a story Kathleen Sadat tells. I'm gonna tell one of your stories, Kathleen, where she was asked by a Southern Oregon leader to host a woman from Southern Oregon who was very anti the ballot measure 9 and was anti-gay, but she was a good Christian woman, and she was willing to listen. And so she came up and visited with Kathleen, and Kathleen took her to the MCC church. She said, will you go to church with me? And the woman said, well, of course. So she took her to the MCC church, and the woman sat through the service. And at the end of it, she went out with Kathleen, and Kathleen said, well, what'd you think? She said, well, I had no idea. And she said, I may not still approve of your lifestyle, but I will support you at the polls.
Wow.
So, those kind of things need to happen in our community too. I think we've because of all the new stuff with gender identity, that maybe we don't even know who we are anymore. Or, when we see somebody, because everybody's got a label or an identity or something, and you're afraid to make a mistake and calling the wrong pronoun or all of these things. As a butch, I never felt comfortable in my skin as a kid, and my family didn't let me be who I was as a teenager. And it wasn't until I became an adult that I could do things. But now I'm running into some of that same invisibility and that same criticism from my community when people say, when are you transitioning? When are you going to have top surgery? When are you going to do these things? And I'm like, I'm not that person. I'm not doing those things. And they're kind of aghast, or they think that's the only way to be, or creates a whole other conversation with people. And if that kind of thing is happening with me, other types of things like that must be happening, and there needs to be more communication amongst us.
Sure. Well, let me turn to our audience. Do we have folks? Do you have questions? Carrie Ann, are we able to? I'm pretty sure we can. If folks have a question, to be able to turn them on so they can ask it directly.
Yeah, we can do that.
Wait, what do folks have? We have Renee here. Now's the time. You might need to send something to that Venmo though.
Well, I do have another story about boycotts,
Okay.
but how the boycotts can go bad.
Oh, well, that would be good. Let's get that one.
Well, I used to go backpacking with Helen Lottridge, who was the executive director of Phoenix Rising, which in the 80s was the counseling and social service queer center. And we had hiked a mile into the Cascade Wilderness and carried in some rafts and rafted to even a more remote spot. And we hadn't seen anybody for miles and miles. And we had landed and we're walking around trying to find a good camping spot. And we see in this creek 2 cans of Coors beer. Well, the gay community had been boycotting Coors for several years because of their anti-gay policies. And we said, oh, it's Coors. We can't drink that. And so we both accepted that and wandered off and never ran into anybody. And then we came back and crossed the creek again and went, oh my God, they're still there. And we didn't see anybody. And dang, those would taste good. And we're like, yeah, no, we can't drink it. So we had this whole conversation for like 2 or 3 hours about what does a boycott mean? Does it mean you don't drink the product if you accidentally get handed it? Or is it you just don't buy it? Or do you write them letters? And so it was a very interesting conversation to have, that we finally just decided, well, we'll drink one of them and leave it for someone else who has less moral qualms about it. And it tasted good. It was the best beer ever. And I hate Coors. But I might have gone too far. Well, I did go too far when I still didn't eat grapes, because after 2 years after the boycott ended, someone said, Renee, that boycott's been over for decades. I went, what? Because nobody told me. I would be on a desert island and wouldn't know the war had ended or something.
That brings up a good, when you do an action, a boycott, protest, whatever it happens to be, and change starts to happen, or there's like some progress or something, at what point is that action that started it not the appropriate action anymore? At what point is the boycott or whatever not the best driver for continuing the change? if that
Right.
makes sense.
Right. At some point you have to switch back and then give them money so they can see that there was a reward for it. I mean, if they're a commercial business.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I don't know if I've ever heard anyone actually answer that, about what's, this whole question of what's the best tactic, and how to go from one tactic to the next to make it effective.
Mhm.
Sorry. Right. Now I'm getting into
Yeah, I know. As far as I know, we're still boycotting Coors.
Yeah, well, as far as I know, we are too. We
It's the endless boycott.
I
And now we have Yelp.
don't know if
People just write bad reviews and stuff.
it's true. But I don't know if Coors has actually ever changed anything.
No.
So, I mean, sometimes it's a little bit easy to tell when they haven't, made any progress of any kind.
Mhm.
Some checking. Do we have, does anyone have any questions? Raise a hand. Should be able, down at the bottom, I'm assuming you should be able to raise your hand, or say something in chat. If not, Renee has tons of stories.
I have a story about one of my grandchildren.
Okay.
Well, Alison Bechtel is a comic strip illustrator. She did the book. She used to do Dykes to Watch Out For and in Just Out. Then later she did a graphic novel called Fun Home. And that got her a lot of New York Times. It was like a New York Times bestseller. And just to bring up to date on who Alison is. But I've known her since the 80s. So, and to have her be Dykes to Watch Out For, and then write this book. And then another lesbian came along and read the book and said, hey, let's turn it into a Broadway play, a Broadway musical. And they turned it into the Fun Home, which won Tony Awards. And, this progression of something that in 1983, you could not have predicted would happen, right? So after the Broadway run, and after they started doing local productions of it with SAG actors, good acting. I don't want to put anybody down. SAG actors, union actors, and I saw it in Portland, and then San Diego, where I have two grandchildren that live. Was producing it, and my grandson got a part in it to play Alison Bechtel's little brother. And so here was this full freaking circle of how can that even be? First, how did I get to be a grandmother? Because I never had any children. And here he was playing Alison Bechtel's little brother. So of course I had to write Alison and tell her what was happening. And so she sent him she hand drew a little card for him that he put on his script book. So then when he went in to start working the show, he had cred.
Nice. Right on.
Yeah, so he was like 9 at the time.
Oh, that's even better. Okay.
Yeah.
I bet that was exciting.
So that came full circle. That was amazing.
Right on.
Yeah.
Well, we have a shy audience. When we kind of went here a little bit earlier, but I guess we'll circle back. Kind of this whole part of the reason for this series, or significant part of the reason for this series, is to capture the stories of our, I hate to break it, our seniors, our elders, our older folks, people who have been around for a while. Because not enough of, to your point, so that we can tell our own stories.
Right.
So they're not told for us. And to get it written down, so to speak. And one of the primary motivators for us at Pride Northwest has been this idea of recognizing that so many of our younger folks don't actually know our history very well. It's still not, it's very little of it is still taught, not taught, it's not taught in schools. That's actually part of our goals with the mural that we just unveiled. This is curriculum development. So it's not taught in our schools. It's still not as accurately represented in media, television, etc., as it needs to be. And so, so there's this disconnect. And so one of our main goals is to provide the opportunity for our folks to talk to our other folks. And so I guess that is a long-winded way to come around to, if you were going to be in a room with our younger folks, what would you say to them? What would you want them to know about you? And what kind of lessons would you want them to benefit from that you've learned?
Well, I think the stories, I'm really good at telling stories to people. Like, so I'd probably start there, just tell them some stories if they would listen. And because that's what I kind of do now. Anytime I'm in any group, been doing a kind of regular fire pit meetup with some people, and we just sit and have deep conversations, and I tell story. I've told some of my stories, and stuff they don't remember, or that they didn't know, or they were just behind it or just in front of it or something. And I think that's the best thing to do. Tell our stories.
Yeah.
And then talk about what the lessons were. Like when I tell the kidnapping story, for me, the lessons were, this is how I learned to be an ally. This is how I learned to be able to stand strong in the face of confrontation, and to stick with it and listen and don't give up. And it was easier the next time, and the next time, the next time that I did that. But you have to do that first one and get it over with, I think. And that those are the kind of lessons people need to know, instead of, I don't know what lessons they're getting now, but just that, and just to accept people where they're at. I could hang out with a Trumper, as long as, well, it's a little harder with that. In the old days, I used to be able to hang out with Republicans. Tom McCall was a Republican.
Very true.
Hatfield, we had some good Republicans. So you can't just because somebody has some label or something that you think, oh, I can't like them for that, or I have to be against them for that. There's got to be something about them you can accept or can be for. And that when you two can meet at that place, that's how you can fix those other places. It's not that it's your job to fix anybody, but if that is what you want to do, if you want to affect change, or you want to learn, you want to grow, and you want people to learn and grow about you, those are the steps you have to take. Athens a dot.
Let's see, what was I going to ask? I don't want to forget, we've talked so much history that we haven't talked very much about now, other than maybe where community's at. What is Tales from the Pandemic?
Well, during the pandemic, I've just stayed low. I was unemployed, so I didn't bother trying to find a job, and I paid a lot of attention to things on social media and newspapers and such. And people were doing really creative things. They were stuck in their houses, and I was just seeing a lot of creativity, a lot of writing, people pushing their boundaries. And I thought, God, I just wish there was a place for those stories to be told, these things to be shown. And then, a year into it, I'm like, well, why don't you do it, ding dong? So at the time I was having Tuesday dinner with my friend Sarah and Mimi, and we decided, the three of us at our Tuesday dinners, that we would create this publication and put it out. But it wasn't going to be a monetary thing. It was just going to be a fun project, getting the kind of arty. So I produced 4 journals, and then it was too hard to, like, the 4th journal came out right after everybody started getting vaccinated. And so I couldn't get anybody's attention focused on the journals. I couldn't get people to submit things, and it was submission driven, and I didn't have the energy to beat bushes to get submissions. So I just let it stop.
Gotcha. So what's
But it was sure fun.
it sounds like it. So what's next?
I'm trying to figure that out. I think I have to write a book. I've been doing this, thinking of all these stories with you. I'm like, yeah, these will make a fun little short story book, right? So it'd be historical, and so maybe that.
Okay.
That's the ever elusive dollar income.
Well, yeah. Yeah. Well, before we close it out, does anyone thought of any questions they'd like to ask Renee while we have her here? I think these people know you really well, Renee. Is there anything else you would like to add that hasn't been said? I mean, there's a lot that hasn't been said, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Any closing thoughts, and how do you want to leave the room?
Well, I would just have to say, reiterate the life mission of get the word out and come out and be your authentic self. And fall in love with life again.
I like that one. Thank you, Renee, for taking the time to spend with us today, and for sharing your stories, sharing your life.
Thanks for having me, Deborah. It was been fun.
Right on. I'm sure that we will do this again at some point. There's just so much to talk about. But thank you very much for joining us, and thank you folks for tuning in and joining as well. This conversation will be put up on the Pride Northwest YouTube channel in the coming weeks. There's some editing that needs to be done. Carrie Ann will make it pretty. And
so
you'll be able to access it from there. Glappin will also include it in the historical archive that will eventually be part of the Oregon Historical Society. So we're excited about that. And as we mentioned earlier, the primary purpose for this program is for us to tell and record our own stories. So if you know anyone who you think should be in one of these conversations, to be able to share their stories, be able to talk about our history, feel free to reach out to us and maybe make a connection, and we can go from there. So thank you thanks, Christine. That's our logo. It works out really well. Thanks again, and we'll close it out with that.
Well, thank you. Thanks everybody for coming. Love you.
Bye, y'all.